They clinked glasses like it was some kind of toast to betrayal. Travis raised his beer. Derek gave him a pat on the back. Roger and Elaine, the proud patriarch and matriarch of this lovely little ambush, smiled as if they'd just announced a wedding. And me? I stood there with sawdust in my hair, my shirt stuck to my back from the heat, blinking like I'd been slapped. Not one of them looked at me. Not even Derek, my husband, my partner, the man who had promised me in those exact words, "We're building this together." The words that finally broke the silence came from him. Derek lifted his wine and said, almost casually, "Come on, Jess. You don't even like water." That was it. That was the sentence that ended our marriage, right there, in front of the lake house I had just spent 2 years of my life rebuilding from the ground up. The house I had scraped mold out of, ripped walls out of, tiled with my bare hands. The house I had believed, stupidly, naively, would be our future. They gave the keys to Travis, the golden boy of the Harper family, unemployed, couch-surfing Travis, whose greatest life accomplishment was being charming enough to make people forget he never paid for anything. Elaine handed him a manila folder with the deed, transfer papers already signed. Roger made a whole speech about new beginnings and who will really make the most of this place. And Derek, he just nodded. I didn't say a word. I turned around, walked past the grill I had built with my own hands, past the new stone patio I had laid, past the people clapping like they were at a surprise party and not a live betrayal, and I got in my truck. Moose jumped into the passenger seat without hesitation. My dog didn't need explanations. He just knew I was leaving, and that was enough. I didn't even start the engine right away. I sat there for a moment, breathing through the burn in my chest, my hand still aching from the power sander I had used just hours before. I stared at the lake, glassy and calm, and remembered what Derek had said the first time I asked him about the cabin. It's not worth fixing. But when Elaine started hinting that someone should restore it, he changed his tune. And I believed we were doing something together. I drove off without dinner, without closure, without dignity, but not without a plan. By the time I pulled into our driveway in Asheville, the sky was bruised with dusk and my shirt clung to me like wet plaster. I went straight into the garage. Moose followed close behind, nails tapping across the concrete floor. I opened the old file cabinet where I kept our house paperwork, old contracts, license renewals, and there it was, the agreement. 3 pages, typed, dated, signed by Roger and Elaine, co-signed by Derek, witnessed by 2 friends, Rachel and Mike, from our local church group, stating clearly, upon completion of full renovations of the Flat Rock property, Jessica Harper and Derek Harper will receive joint ownership of 50% of the home. They had forgotten about it, but I hadn't. I scanned it, saved it, and by the time I fed Moose and took a shower, my lawyer Carl had already replied, "We need to talk tomorrow morning. Bring everything." I leaned against the counter in my bathrobe, dripping wet, hair still heavy with lake dust, staring at the scanned document on my phone, and I smiled. A quiet, cold smile, not because I was happy, not even because I felt vindicated, but because I realized something. They thought I was just the woman with the hammer, but I was also the one with the contract. 2 years earlier, the cabin was a joke. That's what Derek called it the first time we drove out there. "It's a moldy shoebox with termites," he said, half laughing, as we stood in the driveway of the long-abandoned Harper family lake house. Flat Rock was beautiful, don't get me wrong. Quiet water, pine trees, crisp morning air. But the cabin itself? Rotting deck, broken windows, roof sagging like a bad toupee. I looked around and saw nothing but work. Derek's mom, Elaine, wrinkled her nose like she was doing us a favor just by showing it to us. "It was built by Roger's father in the 70s, she said. "But we haven't had the time or energy to fix it. It's a burden, really." She said that word twice, burden, as if planting the idea in my head. She was good at that, planting things, manipulating softly. Then she looked at me, one hand on my shoulder. "But you You have the skills, Jessica. Maybe this place just needs someone with vision. Derek chimed in like it was his idea all along. You've always wanted a project of your own, babe. This could be it. We could fix it up together. Airbnb it. Spend weekends here. Use it for family. Maybe even retire in it someday. I raised an eyebrow. You hate fishing, and water, and yard work. He laughed. But you love this kind of stuff. And think of Moose. He'd love it here. I should have seen it then, but I didn't. I wanted to believe in the dream. Not the cabin. The future. Something we built together. Something that was finally ours. But what do your parents think? I asked, trying to stay grounded. Elaine and Roger had a long history of vague promises and quick withdrawals. They once gifted us a car, then asked for the title back when Derek's sister needed it more. Derek waved me off. They're fine with it. They're just glad someone's willing to take care of the place. Mom even said we could talk about putting it in our name once it's worth something. That sounded like air to me. Pretty meaningless air. So I said flat out, I'll do it. But I want something in writing. Derek rolled his eyes. You don't trust my parents? I didn't answer. He knew the answer. A week later, I drafted a short agreement on my laptop. Simple language. Nothing fancy. Just a clear outline. After completion of full renovations, 50% ownership of the cabin would be transferred jointly to Jessica and Derek Harper. Roger signed it with a grunt. Elaine smiled too quickly. Derek looked uncomfortable, but added his name anyway. I brought 2 friends to witness it, Rachel and Mike. I didn't make a scene. I didn't make speeches. I just filed it away quietly. I think they all assumed I was just being formal, maybe even dramatic. Maybe they thought I'd forget about it, but I didn't. The next day, I loaded up my truck with supplies, strapped Moose into the passenger seat, and drove to Flat Rock. It was cold that morning, the kind of chill that settles deep in your bones. I walked through the front door and stood in the middle of the rotting living room. The floor creaked beneath my boots. The air smelled like mildew and old lake water. Paint peeled off the walls in strips. I remember saying it out loud, just once, to Moose as he sat beside me. Well, buddy, looks like we've got ourselves a monster to tame. He wagged his tail and sneezed. And that was the beginning. The first hammer swing of 2 years I'll never get back. 2 years I would pour into a house that was never really mine. Not to them. Not to Derek. Not even to the people who smiled and shook my hand. But it was mine, in the way that only people who build with their bare hands understand. And I was going to make sure the world saw that. One nail, one beam, one broken promise at a time. They never came out to help. Not once. In the beginning, I told myself that was fine. This was my project, my vision. Derek had his job in town, his gym routine, his fantasy football league. Elaine and Roger had their backaches and doctor appointments. But as weeks turned into months, their absence started to feel intentional. Like I wasn't just the builder. I was the help. Still, I kept going. Every Friday after work, I'd load up my truck with plywood, insulation, or whatever the next stage needed, and Moose and I would drive down to Flat Rock. Sometimes we'd arrive just as the sun was dipping behind the trees, the lake glinting silver like it was trying to apologize for the state of the house. I'd sleep in the unfinished living room on a cot, bundled in 2 layers of flannel and 1 fleece blanket. Moose would curl up at my feet. No heat, no bathroom, just us. Weekends were for demolition. I ripped out every wire and ran new electrical to code, replaced every window with double pane. I re-leveled the foundation on the north side after discovering water damage, so deep you could push your hand into the wood. I stripped down the roof to the joists and laid new decking, sanded every beam, rebuilt the dock, retiled both bathrooms, including a clawfoot tub that nearly broke my back trying to haul in alone. I installed a brand new HVAC unit by myself during a July heat wave. 104 degrees. I passed out in the kitchen for half an hour and woke up to Moose licking condensation off my face from the ice pack I had grabbed before collapsing. That dog probably saved me that day. There were moments when it felt like I was going insane, talking to myself while setting tile, arguing with nails that wouldn't sit straight, crying in the truck on the drive home, not because I was sad, just bone-tired. Derek? He'd call occasionally, ask how it was going. Once, he brought me lunch and took a few photos for Instagram with a caption like, "Wife's killing it at the lake house." He left before helping me haul up the new kitchen cabinets. Said he had a meeting. But every time I looked at what I'd done, really looked, I felt proud. It was the kind of pride that comes from splinters and grit and too much coffee and not enough sleep. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was restoring something sacred, turning decay into something beautiful, turning promises into planks. It was the most honest work I'd ever done. Moose and I had a rhythm. We'd wake up at 6, stretch, eat some instant oatmeal and get to work. At lunch, we'd sit on the new deck I built overlooking the lake. He'd rest his head on my lap while I scribbled notes into a battered notebook. Materials used, hours logged, weather conditions. I didn't know it then, but those notes would later become crucial evidence. Back then, they were just my way of keeping track. Proof that I was building something real. I never charged a dime, never asked for gas money, never billed for supplies I fronted while waiting for reimbursements that never came. All I wanted was for them to keep their word. And Derek, he just kept saying, "It'll be worth it, babe. Trust me. Mom and Dad are good for it." I nodded, smiled, even kissed him once when he showed up unannounced with takeout and a bottle of wine. For a moment, it felt like maybe this was still about us. But those moments, they got rarer, like the nails in that old floor I had to replace, loosened with time, silent at first. Then suddenly you step wrong and the whole thing gives way. I didn't know it then, but I was about to hit that step, and everything would fall through. The day we finished, I could barely feel my hands. I had spent the night before sanding trim until past midnight, running on lukewarm coffee and stubborn pride. By morning, the cabin looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Refinished hardwood floors, fresh paint in soft earth tones, stainless steel kitchen, restored stone fireplace, even a new fire pit by the lake. Everything gleamed like a promise fulfilled. Derek had suggested a small family barbecue. "You've earned it," he said, kissing my temple. "Let's show them what you did." I told him we did it, but even saying it out loud felt off. I had started noticing it by then, the way he said "you" when it was about effort, and "we" when it came to credit. Still, I agreed. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of everything I'd hoped for. The Harpers arrived in the late afternoon. Elaine brought her signature broccoli casserole no one ever touched. Roger had a cooler of light beer and immediately parked himself in the Adirondack chair I built last spring. I said nothing. Travis showed up early, too early, carrying a six-pack and a duffel bag. I asked if he was staying the night. He winked and said maybe longer. The grill was hot. Laughter echoed. Derek poured drinks like a man proud of something he hadn't earned. Elaine walked through the cabin with a glass of wine, gasping at the transformation. "I never thought it could look this good again," she said, like I had performed some kind of miracle. I smiled. I was tired but proud. This made it feel worth it. Then Roger stood up. He tapped his glass with a fork, clearing his throat like he was about to give a wedding toast. In one hand he held a beer, in the other a set of keys. "We've made a decision," he said, puffing out his chest. "This cabin needs to be used, lived in, appreciated, and we know just the person to do that." He turned. "Travis, it's yours." At first I laughed. I honestly thought it was a joke. Some weird Harper family prank to mess with me for working too hard. But no one else laughed. Elaine clapped softly. Derek raised his drink. Travis gave a fake surprised, "What me?" as if he hadn't known all along. Then he walked up, took the keys from Roger like it was a coronation, and held them up for everyone to see. I looked at Derek. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. I said, "You can't be serious." And that's when he finally looked at me, just for a moment. And with the most patronizing little smile, he said, "Come on, Jess. You don't even like water." That line, it gutted me. Not because it was mean, because it was rehearsed, planned. A line someone says when they know exactly what they're doing. The folder Elaine handed Travis had the title, transfer inside. Already signed. The house I rebuilt was never going to be ours. Not to them. Not to Derek. To them, I was just the contractor who didn't charge. The free labor. The tool. People started clapping again. Travis made some joke about fishing rights. Derek laughed. I felt something snap quietly inside me, like a thread being pulled from the inside out. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked back inside, grabbed Moose's leash, clipped it on, and walked straight to my truck. Moose jumped in without hesitation. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just looked at me, ears slightly lowered like he knew, like he'd been watching all along. As I drove off, I didn't look in the rearview mirror, but I did feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, clarity. By the time I reached the edge of Asheville, my hands still sticky with wood glue, sweat drying under my collar, I knew what I needed to do. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to open that file cabinet, and I was going to let the contract speak for me. Carl didn't talk much. That's why I trusted him. I showed up at his office the next morning, still sore, still furious, still trying to wrap my head around what had happened. He was in his late 50s, quiet eyes, the kind of man who doesn't waste breath on sympathy. You bring him facts, he brings you firepower. I handed him the contract. He read it once, then again. No questions, no raised eyebrows, just a quiet, still moment. And then, finally, he looked up and said, "Jessica, you've got them by the throat." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He asked for everything, before and after photos, receipts for materials, records of hours worked. I gave him the battered notebook I'd kept from day one, my logbook, a dog-eared ledger filled with dates, supply lists, progress notes, sketches, moisture readings. I had documented every nail, every storm delay, every inspection passed, not because I thought I'd need in court, but because it was mine, my way of staying honest with myself. "You were smart to put this on paper," Carl said. "They'll probably try to settle once they get a letter from me." I shook my head. "I don't want their money." He paused. "Then what do you want?" I looked him in the eye. "I want what they promised me." That night, Derek texted me, "We need to talk. You're overreacting." Then he called. I didn't answer. Elaine tried calling too. I blocked her. By morning, Carl had sent a certified demand letter to the Harper family attorney, outlining the breach of contract and demanding the immediate transfer of 50% ownership or full property valuation and payout. He included the notarized document, my work log, and a dozen photographs of the renovation process. In legal terms, it was airtight. The backlash came fast. Travis posted on Facebook that I was tearing the family apart over a cabin I never even lived in. Elaine commented with a broken heart emoji. Roger called me ungrateful in a mass text. Derek left a voicemail I didn't even finish. Something about loyalty. Something about family. Moose and I stayed quiet. Instead, I kept working. Took on a new bathroom remodel job in South Asheville. Put my headphones in. Let my tools drown out the noise. But inside I was seething. They weren't just trying to gaslight me. They were trying to erase me. Pretend I was never there. Never the one who bled into those floorboards. Who inhaled that mildew for 2 winters straight. They thought if they piled on enough shame, enough guilt, I'd walk away quietly. But they forgot who they were dealing with. I've never been loud. I don't scream in arguments. I don't throw plates or threaten lawsuits just to scare people. But I keep records. I follow through. And when someone signs their name on a promise, I don't let it slide. 1 week later, Carl called. They responded, he said, his voice like stone. They're claiming it was a verbal agreement, that they don't recall signing anything. They're offering you 15 grand for your trouble. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. File the suit, I said. Carl didn't hesitate. He added claims: breach of contract, unjust enrichment, and his favorite, a count of fraud. That last one might not stick, he said, but it'll make them sweat. And it did, because for the first time they realized I wasn't bluffing. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning, 8:30 sharp, bench seating, no jury, just a judge, a file folder, and a lifetime of betrayal. Carl showed up in a charcoal suit, calm as ever, holding a poster board with a blown-up copy of the contract taped across it, signatures, dates, witnesses. I sat beside him in clean jeans and a gray button-up, hand steady on my lap. Moose waited in the truck with the windows cracked. I didn't want to bring chaos into the room, just truth. Roger and Elaine looked smaller than I remembered. Derek sat 2 rows behind them, arms folded, eyes darting everywhere but toward me. No Travis. Of course. The judge took exactly 12 minutes to skim the case file before turning to Roger. Did you sign this contract, Mr. Harper? Roger cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor, but I didn't fully understand. You're a grown man, the judge said, cutting him off. You signed it. You're responsible for that. Elaine stared at her lap. Derek leaned forward like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. No one said a word after that. Outside the courtroom, their attorney offered us $30,000. Carl didn't even look at me. He already knew my answer. We'll see you at trial, he said. That weekend, Derek served me divorce papers. Apparently, standing up for myself made me combative, unyielding, and my personal favorite, no longer aligned with the family's values. He wanted half of everything. The savings, the house in Asheville, even part of the truck I had paid off 5 years before we met. He also requested primary custody of Moose, which made me laugh out loud for the first time in days. That dog wouldn't go near him. But it got worse. A few days later, Carl called with a flat voice I'd only heard once before, when he told a landlord client their building had asbestos. You might want to sit down, he said. He forwarded me an email chain uncovered during discovery. Their side had failed to redact the attachments. It was supposed to be privileged, but someone had slipped. The chain was between Derek, Elaine, Roger, and their family attorney. The earliest email dated back over a year. Elaine wrote, "We need to be careful how we handle Jessica. She's useful, but we can't let her think she has rights." Derek responded, "She won't. She's focused on the work." Then came the one that hit like a fist. "He'll be too busy working to notice," Derek had written. They didn't even bother to get my pronouns right. I was just he. Just the labor, the free muscle, the tool with a name. In another message, Travis joked, "Jess is flipping that cabin like it's hers." "LOL." Elaine replied, "Well, she thinks it is." My lungs hurt reading those words. For 2 years, I had believed I was building something for my future. Our future. I had stood on scaffolding in the snow, pulled nails with frozen fingers, and stained deck boards by flashlight, not for money, not for fame, but for family. And they were laughing behind my back. They called me boring, predictable, too quiet to ever make noise. They were wrong. Carl updated the complaint, added the emails, and requested a motion for punitive damages. The judge accepted it. That same day, Derek's lawyer called Carl privately to ask if we'd consider mediation. I didn't even let him finish the sentence. "We'll attend," Carl said, but only to listen. At the mediation, Roger looked sickly. Elaine wore a fake smile over clenched teeth. Derek looked anywhere but at me. Their offer? $60,000. I looked at Carl. "No discount," I said. "I want half the value of the home, or I want the house." They went silent. That night, I found out Derek had already emptied our joint account 2 days before filing for divorce. Claimed it was for legal fees. Carl filed a motion to freeze assets. We won. And just like that, their walls began to crack. But it wasn't over yet, because there was one more lie, one more betrayal hiding in the walls. And this time, it didn't come from Derek. It came from Roger. The phone call came from a man named Steve. I didn't know him. He said he was a local investor, someone who bought, renovated, and flipped lakefront properties around Flat Rock. Said he'd seen the Harper cabin before the renovation and again after. He was impressed, curious. Then his tone changed. "You know Roger took out a lien on that house, right?" My stomach dropped. He sent me the records. It was real. 6 months before I finished the renovation, Roger had secretly borrowed $140,000 against the property through a private lender. Used the house I was still actively rebuilding as collateral. Without telling Derek. Without telling Elaine. Certainly without telling me. Carl's response was swift. An emergency motion. The contract. The renovation log. The proof that I, not Roger, was the one who had added value to that home. The judge was livid. Roger and Elaine tried everything. Claimed Roger's health was deteriorating. Claimed Travis was emotionally attached to the house. Claimed I was destroying the family. Carl just stared at them and said, "This is what happens when you lie and get caught." The judge ordered the cabin sold. I listed it through a real estate agent I trusted. We got 5 offers in 2 weeks. The winning bid, $445,000 cash. Roger and Elaine filed an appeal. It was denied. At closing, the court froze half the proceeds, my share. Derek tried to contest it in the divorce court, said he was entitled to part of my portion. But Carl had anticipated that. Months earlier, he had helped me legally separate our finances the moment Derek started acting strange. That money was untouchable. After taxes, fees, and legal costs, I walked away with just over $186,000. Roger and Elaine's half? Gone. The $140,000 lien got paid first, then back taxes, then attorney fees, then penalties. In the end, they walked away with less than $25,000. Travis, who never had any legal claim to begin with, got nothing. The court shut his petition down without a second glance. He skipped town after that. Rumor was he moved in with a buddy in Tennessee. No one's seen him since. Derek lost more than money. He lost his job after Carl handed over the email chain to his employer, a firm that emphasized ethics and integrity. Turns out, helping your parents defraud your spouse doesn't look great on your HR file. Melissa got let go 2 weeks later, too. The nonprofit she worked for didn't appreciate her referring to her husband as a hammer with legs. She wanted Moose. Said the dog was part of the family. But when she got him for a week, he peed on her bed 3 nights in a row. She dropped him off at my job site and never looked back. 1 week later, I closed on a small ranch home outside Asheville. Modest, but mine. I built a new workbench in the garage, put up a fence, planted apple trees, and finally fixed the old rocking chair my grandmother left me. Moose claimed the backyard like it was his kingdom. It rained one night. I let Moose out and stood on the porch, listening to the wind rattle the trees. A few days later, an unmarked envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a photo of the cabin before I'd fixed it. Moldy, crooked, forgotten. On the back, in thick black marker, were 5 words. Hope it was worth it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled, because it was. They thought I was just the woman with the hammer. But I kept the records. I kept my word. I kept the contract. And in the end, I took back everything they tried to steal.